So hello everyone, welcome. This is a Keystone Live, and our topic today is Science Team Goes Off Topic. We're not going to be specifically talking about any one specific science topic, but we are going to discuss some careers and what brought some of our science teachers into the field. So we're going to go around and do introductions, starting with James Havington.
Hi. Like James said, I'm James Havington. I'm teaching biology and physics and a little bit of chemistry, very little.
I'm Karen Griffin, and I teach mostly chemistry. I also have a little bit of forensic science and physical science.
And I'm Kristen Sheffer, and I teach mostly the earth science and astronomy courses.
Thank you. So I'm by trade, my teaching certificate, I'm a social studies teacher, and I know what brought me into the social studies field. So what brought each of you into the science field? Was it teaching initially, or did you have your eyes set on something else and then you kind of were led into teaching? How did your passions lead you into science?
Well, I can start off just to get off track, since we're trying to be off track. So I love to go outside. I love to see things outside and try to understand what's going on in nature. And, very early in my life, I grew up on a farm. So I had all this area to wander around in, to go through the forest. And I grew up on a dairy farm. So, of course, I saw a lot of things going on with animal behavior, with cattle. And so right off the bat, I'm wondering, why is this? Why is this happening? What's going on here? I later found out that science can provide a lot of answers for that. And just recently, I learned something about leaf color. In the spring, we're all going to see this very light colored leaf, sort of a bright light colored green. And then as the summer goes on, it's going to get darker. Now, why does this happen? So I learned, well, in the spring, the leaves only have a few, only a little bit of pigment in them, just a little bit of chlorophyll. And as the spring and summer goes on, chloroplasts, there are going to be more chloroplasts, which will absorb more light, which will make the leaves darker. So science gives us this joy of being able to understand what's around it. And that's what really attracts me.
I think I can really relate to what you just said, because for me, it was kind of similar. When I was younger, I was very interested in canoeing and kayaking and hiking. And I was actually an outdoor guide for a long time. And so I recognized this wonder and beauty of our natural world. And I kind of developed this passion for sharing it with other people. And so in trying to better understand the world and environmentalism, it kind of steered me right into teaching.
I can see some of the same in myself, in that I definitely love being outside. I'm definitely curious. I definitely want to understand how things work. It's exciting to figure something out, right? And ask questions. The beginning for me was somewhat different. I didn't have, so we had a book, right? But we weren't really allowed to watch it. It was never on, right? And I grew up in a really small community, and I didn't have a whole lot of exposure. And I remember in 7th grade was the first time that it was a lab science course. And that was just wow. And then the other thing that really sticks out in my mind is this particular teacher had years of National Geographic magazines, the old, do you know what I'm talking about? The old National Geographic. And he would let you sign them out, almost like it was a library. And I just devoured them. How many can I have? Only one at a time, right? Yeah. And so I start going through these, and I'm like, this is amazing. There are all these things out there, and we can learn how they work. And I still get excited. I still get goosebumps, because it was just the coolest thing. And it just really excited that curiosity in me. And then in 10th grade, I had a chemistry teacher, and I was a very shy, very quiet student. I did not like to be noticed, did not want to talk, right? I'm that kid. And he understood that personality, but found a way to give me confidence without calling me out. And he was really showing me like, hey, you have a passion for this and you're good at it. And I hold that with me, not only in my interest in science, but that one of the things that I really want to do as a teacher is to make other students feel that way too, because that affects not just their learning in science, but that affects their learning across the board, that hopefully affects who they become and how they help other people. And then that's the piece of how I got into teaching. I worked in a lab for a while. It was great. I got to discover new things. I got to write a lot of reports. But I didn't make a difference. You know, I wasn't doing the cure for cancer, right? I didn't have a PhD. But I didn't get to give positive energy to people any day. And I just did some research on what some different options were. And I thought, you know what? I think being a teacher is my purpose. And that's how I ended up in teaching.
Just as devil's advocate, I mean, a little bit about careers. So in terms of science, now, do we have to be curing cancer to have a valuable career?
That is a
Contributing something important?
I agree with you. I
Yes,
agree
sir.
with you. That's fair. I was doing water analysis, high pressure liquid chromatography, and it was like
Okay.
for industrial water filtration.
Oh, that's
So
interesting. Well, to me,
it
it's
was
interesting.
very
To me,
interesting. It was extremely detail oriented. You know, parts per million, parts per billion. But I was, you know, you couldn't have, there couldn't be any outside, you know, light. Like it was an inside room, just me. You know, you're scrubbing
okay,
in and
well,
scrubbing out.
okay.
And so the day, and like lunch break would come and I'd be like, I'd run outside, right?
They let you out. Okay. No.
And I remember the day that I went to my boss and I was like, look, I'm going to go back to school. I'm really sorry. I'll do whatever you need me to do to get ready for the next person. He was like, I've been waiting for you to come to me. he's like, don't get me wrong, you're doing great. And, you know, but I knew you needed to be with people.
Well, that's understandable. You can't be locked up in a lab. Oh.
Yeah, no sunlight either. No trees, no sunlight, no leaves,
Okay.
definitely no chlorophyll. Just a whole bunch of ions.
Hey, as long as there are people around doing detailed work is nice.
But I think also so worth mentioning though is you're giving one example of one career in
There we
this
go.
huge field of science,
That's true.
right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
there's the introvert people that love that lab setting, and there's places in
Right.
science for the extrovert people as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Great point
Absolutely.
there too. Very true.
And
Yeah.
in between the two extremes, every degree. Yeah. So yeah, I feel like there's massive opportunity in science and probably more now than ever.
Mhm.
You know, better
And I think
instruments, better everything.
I think, Kristen, I was just thinking about what you said. That's a really good point because, and I think pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone is a good point too, because I am by definition or by test an introvert, believe it or not, right? So I think there's something to be said about how sometimes what might bring you joy and fulfillment isn't what it looks like it should be on paper.
Well, yeah, so
Yeah.
to that point, I am the person that did not think I would go into science. When I was in school, I thought I didn't like science at all, but then I kept like taking these science classes and I just kept falling back into it. And I don't know what kept driving me to it, but I got really good at it. And then when I started to discover that it like, you know, science is like opening the window to our world around us, I fell in love with it. So I was a student. I wouldn't have thought I would have picked this career at all. And so like you talked about being in a lab, like a little bit of my background, I did a lot of field research. So my lab was outside. So I worked in like the Southwest and Arizona and Utah and Colorado, and we would, from Monday through Thursday, we were out in the field camping in tents, collecting data on fish. And then
Nice.
Saturday and Sunday, I would come home
Nice.
and turn on Netflix and like enjoy my air conditioner. So when you're doing research, there's so many different possibilities of what that research looks like, what you're researching on, but then also like what your lab looks like.
I like what
Yeah.
you said about the social component, because there's this whole range, like what Karen was saying. Some people like to just, be on that data, be there, pretty much be on their own. And then there's a whole range of opportunities for people that are more outgoing or want to be more outgoing. And the thing about science, I just love to know how things work. So I really have an introverted side, but I also have an outgoing side. So it's a little bit of both for me. And so, definitely someone like me, there are plenty of opportunities in science where you can do both. You can be very focused, and you can also have that social outreach to go along with it.
Well, that's one of the key pieces of the scientific method, right? Is that communication and sharing our science with the rest of the world. So absolutely, yeah. And we're just talking about research, right? Like there's still applied sciences too that we haven't even touched on.
Engineering, which is fascinating in itself. It doesn't have to be lab work, all kinds. That's another thing about just thinking about physical science. It sort of leads you towards engineering in a lot of ways, which I think is really cool. There's a lot of cool stuff going on. I love to know how machines work, a lot of fascinating machines.
You think about today, probably more than ever, alternative energies, right?
Oh yeah.
You have windmills, you have solar, and all of that goes back to science, right? And how that works.
Very much so. Yeah.
We have about 20 miles from here, we have windmills. Another 20 miles the other way, they have a big solar panel set up.
Oh yeah.
So just a wide range.
And the nuclear plant, the
nuclear plant. Yep.
Yeah.
Out toward Berwick, PA. Yep.
Do you have a supply of pills? You're supposed to have iodine pills.
In
Yes.
my first teaching job was in Beaver, Pennsylvania, which is very close to a nuclear power plant. And we had drills, and we had to have iodine tablets on hand for every student in the classroom.
They're actually super safe, but
yeah, there was actually a whole plan for evacuation.
Oh
yeah.
So
they're crazy super safe, but
science can be also like have this element of danger to it, right? Like I also worked in a lab where we worked with radioactive isotopes, and we'd work with a lot of dry ice. And I used to wait for like classes to change. This was, in grad school, I'd wait for classes to change when I would start working with the dry ice. So it would leak under the door that said radioactive on it to kind of make the undergraduates nervous. So the science can be a lot of fun and have an element of, danger, right?
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, it could adrenaline hit. It can be sort of a rush.
It was not completely safe, right? But maybe not everybody knew that.
It isn't just staring at the data, or it's more than that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
it's more than that.
Yeah, and I mean, even so, also in regulation, right? So I've worked a lot in regulation. So taking that science, taking your research and then applying it on how to keep people safe, right? So how do we know that the radioactive isotopes I was working with, and how do we know like about the iodine tablets, right? Like, so applying that research and creating safety measures. And
I don't have any, but I'm going to go and buy some now.
Yeah.
Just in case. It's only like, what is it, 10 miles from me or something? I don't know.
Hey, it can't hurt to be prepared.
Yeah. But it's actually wonderful. I mean, I think we probably should be moving more towards nuclear energy.
And that's something with that particular nuclear plant too. is right across the road from it is a whole, they call it the Riverlands.
Yeah.
There's Lake Took-a-While, there's the river, there's trails, there's all sorts of wildlife sanctuaries that are basically set up because of that power plant too. So it's kind of mixing science and what we need as a society, but also making it work within nature too. And that's a whole, the regulations and how is this going to impact this? You think of the windmills, and the big concern there was migratory patterns, right? And studying the migratory patterns of the geese, swans. We had one of the biggest flocks of swans on the beaver dam that's behind my house this year that we've ever seen before. There's
Beautiful.
about 30 of them back there, and we've never seen that before. So why that is, I don't know, and there's probably an answer somewhere in science that would explain it to me, why we've seen so many this year, to where we normally just have the Canadian geese. But all of that is studied, and it all applies to science. I think we hit on some great topics here today, and some wide ranges, from working in a lab isolated to working out in the field, and maybe you're still isolated, but you're outside, but then also working in teams and sharing that information also, and having some fun while we're at it, even if it's scaring some undergrads.
That's good fun.
It is. And I like how we went back and forth and said, devil's advocate, and what about this experience? Because that in and of itself is so important in science, that communication. So I really enjoyed getting to have that conversation. So thank you.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Havington, Mrs. Griffin,
Thanks.
and Mrs. Sheffer. This is a great conversation. I think our students are going to find it tremendously interesting, and hopefully open some of their eyes to some future careers within science, and we get to see them active in your courses too. Thank you, everyone, and don't forget to tune in for future Facebook Lives. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.